Good afternoon and welcome to you all from the School and Nursery Show here in Dubai. My name is Fiona Cottam and I'm the principal at Heartland International School. And this is the final panel discussion that has taken place over the last 2 days. It's been an incredible show. Thousands of people have joined us here in the very real world, but many more thousands of you have joined us virtually to listen to these discussions after the event from the comfort of your home. The final session of today actually is a very interesting and very open discussion point, and one that many of us are trying to crystal ball gaze in terms of what the future will look like. The topic is the changing face of education in the virtual world. And I'm so glad in some ways that I'm the person asking the questions rather than having to answer that. But I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by a group of experts who all come from a range of different schools and with a range of different experiences. To my left is Paul Kelly, who is head of secondary at Sunmark School. Beside him, Craig Lampshade, a colleague of many years, who will be the principal at the Royal Grammar School Dubai, which will open in this coming September. And also David Hudson, who is the head of school at Dwight, and we've done a couple of panels together over the last couple of days, David. So look, a big question, you know, the changing face of education, and we have moved into different times. Microsoft Teams, Zooms, all the different pieces of technology. Suddenly Seesaw has become one of the most important things that we have, that we took for granted before. Paul, what are your views? You just come to Dubai from Shanghai, where you were for sort of 10 years before. The changing face of education, the virtual world.
Yeah, it's everyone could see it coming, and then it hit us hard when COVID came, because it went from something that we were choosing to opt in and out of to something that we had to do in order to manage it. In a funny way, COVID has been probably the best CPD teachers will ever get, because they have to engage in it, and there's been a lot of learning that's been done by our colleagues through this process. You said earlier, crystal ball gazing, exactly what it is. We're all waiting to understand what it's going to look like in another 3 years, 5 years. Synchronous, asynchronous, are we going to be combining these things together? I can see moving forward that there are going to be more virtual schools popping up. Obviously, I think there's some challenges with social well-being that come with that. But I think most of us would be happy to go and find a balance between our more traditional education and the virtual approach that I think we're going to be forced into using.
Craig, you know, the Royal Grammar School, Guildford, Dubai, about to open its doors in September, a blank sheet of paper in so many ways, albeit hundreds of years of history. Education in the virtual world, how is that fitting into the scheme of things in terms of the plan for you opening your new school?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Going back to what Paul said, I think it's been a bit of a wake-up for education in terms of choosing into this or buying into this. I think in terms of, if you look at us, we have that blank sheet, so we're looking across all the systems, ed tech, through to, so I suppose, the systems that sit behind the support of ed tech. Things like VR, things like immersive education, immersive rooms. I think the real point is, schools have dabbled in this for sort of 10 years. It's been around, and as you said before, there's been some lighthouse schools, but now sort of everyone has to do it. Everyone's sort of bought in. I think there's still a lot of learning to say what actually adds value to student learning. And what's mimic and gimmick, and what's the real value in terms of how does it add value. I think the other piece will be not only in terms of the academic, in terms of what students experience in terms of their academic curriculum provision, but the welfare piece. I think there's a lot to be said. How are we going to use IT and VR to actually track and engage students in terms of a welfare piece? And that's something we're looking at now is, what does that look like? How can that support us in being much more intelligent to support kids, especially coming back in after COVID, where they haven't had those social interactions, where they haven't been in classrooms. And we were talking about just before the richness of what that brings, and I suppose what children have missed over the last 12 to 18 months. So I think there's a piece of work to be done there, which is going to be very interesting moving forward. But yeah, we're very lucky.
I'm just going to stay with you for a moment, because we do it by instinct, don't we? Immersive education, ed tech, IT. What does that mean to the parent at home? We use lots of jargon, don't we, in education, and we take it for granted. But what will it look like for the parent?
So I suppose the immersive education part is sort of walking into a room like this, I guess, and being fully immersed in your surroundings. So being able to manipulate that 360-degree view cameras, full 360 sound, and children actually being in places which sort of transform them. It's almost like the Star Trek holodeck type idea. You've gone from place X to place Y, and you're experiencing that in a whole different realm of just sitting there watching a computer. And I suppose it's the same in terms of VR. And that gives you an amazing opportunity to do things which you can't do on site. You can act in terms of, I suppose, experiments, or literally space and dimension, and being able to sort of, I suppose, get a much better feeling for those dimensions. I mean, I was reading something not too long ago about a young man, I can't recall his name, but basically it was him saying that had he not been able to access state-of-the-art, and I mean industrial type labs, then he wouldn't have been able to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, I think it gives students opportunities to, can we replicate that in a school? You don't have to go and buy a $1 million piece of machinery or a $500,000 piece of machinery. You could have that virtually. So I think that, in terms of those things,
it's exciting times, and I'm sure that parents are sitting at home going, wow, I wish I could go back and go to school all over again. In fact, I'm sure many of us think the same thing, because the opportunities that our young people have are just astounding, really, and how it's going to open doors. And as you said, bring them to places that they could never have dreamt of going to before. What does it look like, David, at Dwight? What does this whole, not just the immersive education piece, but the use of the virtual world in education today? What's it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's down to you. You make a good point about the quality of learning, the quality of education, but it's very much looking at the well-being of the child, and the engagement is the big one for me. So I think, for us in terms of online learning, learning through technology, it's trying to have it so it's live learning, it's synchronous learning, to give students that experience. We're quite fortunate in that at Dwight School Dubai, Dwight actually has an online school, Dwight Global, so we've been able to tap into how they teach the children, keep them engaged. And we've moved away from recorded lessons and everything that can be done in students' own time. Students want that engagement or interaction, and we need to know about their well-being as well. So in our structure, we would have that live lesson time, but we'd also have that time to check in on a child's well-being, to actually ask how they are coping, what they need from the school outside of the sort of subject curriculum teaching, if you like. And that's been a really important part of it. We've managed to keep our school open the whole academic year, which we're really proud of. And it has involved, as Paul was saying, teachers upskilling and being very, very flexible. But actually, at the other end of the screen are a group of students that, for whatever reason, may not be able to get into school. So are we meeting their own personal individual needs in addition to their academic needs? And try not to give them too many platforms to worry about. So like you said, Seesaw in the lower school, it might be Google Meet in the upper school. So they're not moving around multiple platforms. They become very expert and familiar with one platform, and then we feed in the different technology within that.
Let me throw a bit of a contentious question out to you. We're in a very privileged part of the world. We live in Dubai, where we have access, thankfully, to 3G, 4G, and 5G in many parts of the city, and that certainly is developing and growing. But there are immense swathes of the world where children haven't even got access to basic education and school. Is the divide going to grow, do you think, between those that have and those that haven't, particularly as this virtual world and these new technologies become even more pertinent in education today, how young people are learning and the skills that they're developing? I'm not trying to ask the question, Paul, as an ethical question, but more just as a point of debate in terms of the continuing divide in the world in terms of access to equality in education.
Well, it is fundamentally, it is an ethical question anyway, but educationally, I think there's always going to be a divide between those that can and those that can't afford a certain education. I was lucky enough to take a group of students to Tanzania years ago, and we fitted solar panels and solar lighting in people's huts and mud huts. And the first set we fitted, the lady came in and turned the lights on and burst into tears. And these were all 14-year-old boys who stood there, didn't understand what they'd done wrong. They thought they'd done a good thing. And I was trying to explain to you, you've moved her out of the dark ages. You can literally choose, those children now have an opportunity to read in the evening because you've fitted these lights that cost $40. So there's always there's always going to be that divide. My children are incredibly adept on a computer, on a smart. I mean, all kids I think laugh at their parents when their parents are finger tapping and stuff like that. But they can multitask. I'm not sure anyone really multitasks, but they're much faster in processing the stuff. And a new phone comes out and they've done it like that. So as schools and companies become more reliant on advanced technology, the people that have had access to it during their school career, they're going to have a leg up, and that's just part of life. I think. I guess the ethical part of that is, how do we create cheap, usable devices that can be given to places in the world where they can't access it, without falling down the rabbit hole of having children making those devices in the first place? How do you because I'm sure there are lots of people with tablets sitting at home that could just send them to Africa, and or not just Africa. I mean, we ran a lot of things in Shanghai, and I'm sure that it's exactly the same here in the Middle East. That 5 miles from our school were people living in dreadful conditions, and nobody chooses it.
But I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? The challenge of us and our privilege and the privileged world that we do live in. There are opportunities there, aren't there, in terms of what we build as an education system to make sure that we support and we certainly make our young people aware so that they can make that difference in the future, because this virtual world isn't going away, is it? If anything, it's going to move at such a speed that we'll get left behind. How do we make sure, Craig, that our young people are ethically minded? How do we keep them grounded whilst the world moves at such an extraordinary pace with information literally at the touch of a fingertip, in a very virtual world?
I think the point you made, your first point in terms of the divide, I think the divide's there. I mean, it's not just about education, it's about well-being and medicine and health and the sort of the fundamentals, and even previous to education. I think if you go back to the sort of we were talking about VR. I mean, one of the best ways to move anyone to do anything is to get some understanding and some empathy. So imagine if we take our students through a VR environment and we actually make them, we transit them, say, right, well, here's a piece of curriculum. Now we're going to move you to place X. And this is how those students experience that curriculum. This is what it feels like to be in that situation. How do you now feel? What do you want to do about it? And I mean, that would just be amazing. I'm sort of getting shivers now just thinking about it. I mean, and it'll be the young people who go, well, that can't happen. We need to do something. And they will be the ones who do something, right? They'll come up with a new piece of tech that's 1/100th the cost, or something, whatever. I probably can't even think about what they could come up with, but they will be the movers and shakers to say, well, actually, that's not good enough. I mean, I think if you look at that, and if we can do that on scale, it's that mass movement of strength of the young people behind it that will actually mean that the policymakers, us, the educators, and them themselves, when they get to that point, actually change that and make that a better world for everyone. It's not going to be easy, absolutely not. I mean, we're talking about a fairly significant divide, but I think starting with that empathy, and as you said before, getting that really depth of understanding of other people's situation would be really important. Great way to do it.
And I think the key thing in all of this, David, is that just because we're using technology, just because we're moving into a virtual world, and just because we are very lucky and privileged, doesn't mean that we have to lose sight of the core values of who we are as people, and that core curriculum delivery and ethical delivery and debate and discussion that we have in terms of critical thinking and awareness with our young people. If anything, as Craig has said, we enhance it. I mean, talk to us about what you're doing at Dwight.
I think absolutely. I think we've got to remember that we're talking about technology here, but fundamentally learning is learning. And of course, learning in the classroom with the teacher, with their fellow students. And I agree, whether it's at policy level, whether it's at individual school level, we should be educating our children to have those core values. And I think they do, and I think we work with parents with that, but it is giving those examples. So at the school, it might be that looking at a particular service project, looking at a particular case study. It can be in many different forms. It can be within one lesson, or it can be across multiple subjects within the curriculum. But I think it's just that awareness of the world, and not being insular to that classroom or to Dubai or to a world of technology. Who are we as people? I mean, fundamentally, we want our students, our children to graduate with excellent qualifications and grades, but actually we want them to graduate as very tolerant, respectful people that have those ethical core values. And I believe our children do have that. And our job is simply to steer them through, leading by example, but also giving them the opportunity to contribute. So it might be, like Paul was saying, it could be as specific as a project to support a school in Tanzania, or it could be something that is ongoing. So there's an ongoing connection with another school. So we as a school would partner with other schools so that children can talk to each other and share their experiences to develop that sense of empathy and understanding.
And I think it's important that parents understand that we have to embrace new technologies, we have to embrace the virtual world, but it doesn't mean that we lose our heart and soul of who we are, does it? Schools fundamentally will still work with young people in terms of, rights and wrongs and making good decisions. And that's our job as educators, isn't it?
Well, in fact, I mean, it potentially could, as you say before, actually give the opportunity to be placed in the situations where students, are safe to explore and develop that empathy.
We actually we had a Thursday. We had a group of children from Harare in Zimbabwe online with a group of our children as part of World Reads. And it was really interesting because they were going through a particular poem, but it was incredibly interesting to hear about the kind of feeling of being trapped that our children felt compared to the situation that those and I know that our kids were very moved by. I know we talk about first world problems, and I know it's easy to turn around and do it, but a lot of the time the children don't have more of a perspective than what they have access to. So widening that access widens the perspective.
Your example leads us absolutely perfectly in, and I'm going to throw the question to David because he sits at the end. He thinks he gets the question last, so he's got time to think.
I get to pinch all of your ideas and then add one of my own.
I'm going to start down at the end this time, but it follows on absolutely perfectly, Paul, from what you've just exemplified there. The question is, from a parent, how have schools used technology to their advantage during the pandemic? How has it improved our schools? How has it actually moved us a step forward? Your example of that, the case study, the young people in two completely different continents having discussions about what feeling trapped means to them. Can you give us an example perhaps of how Dwight has actually used technology to your advantage over the last 14 months?
I think not necessarily to advantage, but to not use an excuse for not doing something. I think for me during the pandemic, we could use that as an excuse for learning to stop in many ways. So we've tried to embrace technology both from a communication point of view in terms of how we communicate with parents that we would love to have in the school face-to-face, but we've asked what they would like in terms of how they communicate with us. But from an education point of view, I mean, one of the most amazing things that I witnessed this year was a Model United Nations event that had been organized. And our students were actively involved. And I sat with the students who were obviously socially distanced and all the protocols were followed. But I thought it was an amazing experience because there's an example where they were obviously talking about global issues, poverty, famine, globalization, but they were connecting with children in other schools, really critical thinking, really evaluating the situations. And that was a great example of how technology enhanced not just their technical skills, but their empathy and their compassion and their debating and their critical thinking. And actually, I think that in a way, that made the conference, the fact that it was so well organized, but actually all of the students were able to fully participate through the technology. And that to me was great because if we're not careful, we can either run away from the technology, or in some cases we can just be reliant on technology. But I think for many schools, it's being able to understand when it's really, really useful, and rather than not doing something, to make sure that it's in place so that our students continue to have high quality learning experiences.
But even the basics, certainly I think as a school, when I look particularly across the primary phase, we were much better at communicating through sort of technology with older students. But I look at our use now of Microsoft Teams, and literally no child is left behind. And KHDA's joke about the fact there is no such thing as a rain day in Dubai anymore because learning can still continue. Any other practical sort of ways, for example, and I'll come to you first, Paul, because you're in a school, whereas Craig, you're about to open a school, but practical ways that you've used technology to sort of actually enhance what's happening for the student on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, we have a lot of VR. We can't use it at the moment, unfortunately, because of the nature of COVID. So it's been a challenge to kind of move down that. That's made it hard. There's been some really simple things that we do a lot of work with student voice and using the technology to get quick feedback using Microsoft Forms or Google Forms, whichever we use Microsoft. That's been really, particularly with respect to the children's wellbeing. It's given you almost a traffic light every day where you can just check up to things that I don't think we've probably experienced both as teachers and parents, the parents' evening of kind of queuing in a hall and jostling for position, and that's now gone. I'll be surprised if we ever move back to that kind of parents' evening. So there are sort of wins that have come out of it, but I don't think we'll really see the major shifts. We already were a bring your own device. I think we've got better at working collectively on documents and getting the children to do that, and that's been quite useful. But I don't know how far you'll shift down until the COVID restrictions are taken away and actually they can share the hardware as well as using the software in the same way. Once the hardware becomes open, I do think it will be a game changer, and I do think all the things that we mentioned earlier about having that, being able to put people in that environment and have them actually experience it, particularly through the VR, that will be really interesting. I'll let you know how that goes.
Good. But it has forced change, hasn't it? It forced us into action when we couldn't have imagined it. Craig, looking forward, opening a new school in relation to this, what do you think the initial impacts will be? Because it's likely that you'll still open a school under some form of COVID restriction.
Sure. Look at just, I suppose, some of the other value added. I think going back to some of the points you raised was, I think what it's done is it's taken away the excuses. Before it was too easy to say, let's bring 500 children together across 10 schools. It's just too hard. Yeah. It's too hard to timetables and students and buses and this, that, and the rest. Now, teams with 1,000 children, it's easy. It's just taken away that excuse. I mean, I remember attending a conference by the RGS students in Guildford, and they had access to speakers from all over the globe. Now those people would not have been able to travel to Guildford to speak to those students, and therefore, but through Teams and through access of IT, that's become the norm now. So the excuse is gone that you can't access people, that you can't get additional skill, that you can't collaborate, that you can't bring students together for things like MUN or for school sharing and pairing. So it's just taken all that away now. So that is the norm.
Yeah, and the other thing it's taken away actually is those guest speakers, because we've done the same. They previously would have charged you 5,000 dirham a day plus the flight plus the hotel. Now they do it for free because it's just a half an hour on a quick Zoom call. It's great. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's opened lots of doors.
I think also. Craig, Paul, right, and it's also with the parents, like you said, and also as professional development for teachers as well, being able to jump onto a call and learn about effective pedagogy in terms of IT teaching. We can jump on again. It would have been organizing a venue, and now actually we can easily get 30, 40 teachers together and demonstrate it, and feedback is instant with students as well. You drop into a lesson, the teachers instantly give feedback individually and collectively, and even going in and marking online. So I think the feedback has been a real benefit.
I think somebody must be feeding you guys the parent questions to an earpiece, because the next question from a parent actually fits in really well, David, with what you've just started to talk about there. But it's quite specific, the question. It's what training have we given to staff to actually get up to speed and to keep ahead of the game in relation to technology specifically, so that the quality of what we deliver in school and what we do with our young people is at its cutting edge. Let me start with you on that, Paul. You know, what training have you had to put in place as a school?
So teams of OneNote, using the group working on the documents. That was it, the first sort of move. Then it was breakout rooms, because you know, as you say, it's okay having 30 or 22 in our case, but people in a room, virtually in a room, but there are going to be very few that are going to have the confidence to speak out as they would in a classroom. You know, so you can. So we needed to show people how to use the Teams properly, how to use breakout rooms properly, how to use OneNote, how to feedback. One of the things we've implemented is a daily message to parents. So it's a bespoke. So every parent gets a message every day to say exactly what their children have learned that day in a kind of key line. So it might, it may just say, Paul worked on algebra today, chapter 1 of textbook 2. And that's part of engaging the parents in there to avoid the, how did you get out of school today? All right, what happened? Nothing. It's to avoid that. So we've had to give the staff sort of some training on that. I think fortunately a lot of international schools have got quite a young staff body, so they're maybe less reticent to sort of throw themselves at the technology.
Yeah, and not just that, but international. If you're brave enough to jump on a plane and travel 3,000 miles to teach in a school internationally, you usually are quite a resilient and forward-thinking and courageous person yourself. So teachers have absolutely taken risks.
Yeah.
And if I think back to last March, those first couple of weeks of hesitancy, I mean, they dissipated so quickly because teachers adapted so quickly. But yes, I mean, I think every school has put training in place, haven't they?
I would be amazed. I mean, my sister-in-law is a teacher in the UK. And they're in very deprived area, and they've struggled so badly because they don't have access to the hardware.
And that brings us on to the next question, actually. And I'm just conscious that we're nearly on half an hour, which is incredible that this conversation could go on for the next few hours. But Craig, a question from a parent is, we talked about the fact that we're privileged here, that we have great technology in our schools and great access to that technology. And Paul has just exemplified, a family member who's having difficulties because of the lack of availability of technology. The question from the parent is, will the using of advanced technology here, for example, create a difficulty for some students who will have to change either schools or countries in the future? Are we actually creating part of the gap in terms of what we're doing? It's an interesting dilemma. You can see Craig loves that question.
I love that
It's a
question.
tough one.
No, look, I think what I'd say there is, I think every school with a focus on education, a focus on children's wellbeing, will bring something different to the party. So we're lucky enough that we can bring a really strong education infrastructure, and like you say, devices and internet, and all these sorts of wonderful trainings from within the region. And this, I think, if a child, it's more about, going back to what you said before, it's about the skills and the fundamental learning, and that adds value to learning. It's not the end point. It's part of the puzzle. So I think if children get those skills in terms of critical thinking, analysis, et cetera, and they take those with them to their next setting, they'll be just as successful there, but in a different context. And that school will add great value with whatever context. I'm just trying to think, if I was a school in the middle of a rainforest, wow, what an amazing opportunity that would be, right? Would I love to have a rainforest? Absolutely, I'd love to have a rainforest. I'd love to have a rainforest and great tech. But, so maybe one school has one and one school has another. So
I think that's the point. What we're doing all the time, isn't it? We're adding value, and parents shouldn't worry that there might be gaps in other parts of the world, because children are resilient, and actually they'll use that skill and expertise in a different way, and they're very adaptable. Gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our conversation. I'm just wondering if succinctly you can sort of give your final thoughts to parents on education and the future. If we had got that crystal ball today at the end of this wonderful 2 days that we've had together, what would be your final points? David, I'll start with you down that end.
Okay, I think for me, in some ways, it doesn't matter what the curriculum is, or even what the level of technology is. It is about equipping our students, our children, to have those transferable skills. So as they progress through each stage of education, move to university, start thinking about their chosen career, they have developed skills from their school environment that are going to equip them. Everything from what we said about the core values and the ethics, right through to use of technology and critical thinking. But if we have a skills-based curriculum, then I think that's the way forward.
Brilliant. Thank you. Craig, final thoughts from you this afternoon?
So I'm going to crystal ball in a very positive manner that, I see that immersive ed tech will be commonplace in a lot of places in the world, and I think it will add value in terms of the development of skills and attributes, as we said before, empathy. And I'd hope to think that through that, then we'll start to shrink the divide. Something will actually happen positively. I mean, it's sort of Moore's law, right? In 10 years' time, maybe we can pick up a phone for 10 cents. Who knows? I mean, let's hope so, right?
Yeah,
and
I do.
Get that out to everyone.
That'd be great. Paul, final thoughts of the day?
I think it is. There'll always be a divide. Unfortunately, there'll always be a divide. I think that schools will continue to embrace education. One of the things that I found great about moving to Sunmark was the children are very empathetic, and I got a lot of support when I first arrived because I get lost everywhere. So it was mostly walking me around the school to the right places. They were great, but we talk about them being privileged, and they are. But we know that privilege for them comes at a cost. For a lot of them, being away from family in their home countries and things like that. So it isn't. Privilege doesn't mean easy for them. It's a different kind of hard that they deal with. But yeah, they are lucky in so much that they will be at that cutting edge, and just to retain that growth mindset and to have that empathy that we've all I think we all push in all of our schools. Okay. That is going to keep those children managing the technology rather than the technology managing the children.
And I suppose in the context of keeping us at that cutting edge, we've been incredibly privileged to have 2 days of incredible panels from incredible guest speakers across an array of schools, the experts that lead the incredible schools that are in this city that we all have access to. My thanks to David, to Craig and to Paul for your contributions this afternoon. Really good to have you here. Really good that we've ended on that positive note of looking to the future and that feeling that the future is positive and that we can embrace everything that we've learned through this pandemic to make school and education a better place for all children. On behalf of the School and Nursery Show, our thanks to you for joining us today, or indeed in the future, wherever you may be. Great that we're using the technology to reach out to you in your homes. It's been my pleasure and my privilege to be here for the last 2 days. On behalf of us all, thank you so much from the School and Nursery Show.